Hello everyone and welcome back to another video here on my channel. Today I am going to be going over how to make modern dance floor drum and bass in FL Studio. This can of course be done in any DAW, that's just specifically what I'm using today in this video. If you enjoy it, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe for more content, but let's go ahead and get right into things here. Before I explain everything, I'm going to go ahead and play the track for you so you can see what your end result should hopefully sound like if you apply the lessons that you could learn in this video. So let's go ahead and play that from the top now. So that is the track I've put together for this tutorial here. We're going to be going over exactly how this was done and how you can get something similar. This is mainly going to focus on production things like how to fill up space, how to process leads, stuff like that. So you can hopefully make a full sounding mixdown. And of course this is a work in progress, so things aren't necessarily complete yet. And there are some bits that could even be better. But starting things off, I want to talk about probably the most important part of the whole thing. This being your lead sound and of course its relationship with your bass. So I do actually have a few elements here that we're going to solo and take a listen to. The first being lead 1. Alright, so here's our main lead for this track. Now this is just a simple sound I put together in Serum. You could see there's not really much going on here. I started off with 2 saw waves, one has 2 voices of unison and is an octave up, and then I just played around with the sync knob to give it a different tone. And I've made this a little more of a plucky sound in terms of its decay. This isn't something that sustains for a very long time. You see it does end up dropping off. And then I do have some multiband compression on there. I'll show you what this sounds like without effects as well, just so we could compare. This is the original sound here. All I'm doing really is beefing that up with a delay. You can see that's being sent to another channel. And then in terms of how I process this, we do have a FabFilter Saturn 2. I love this plugin. It's really great. This is a saturator. I'm making things like the mids and the highs very crunched and consistent. And then of course we do have some reverb going into a very large compressor that I'm then cleaning up with an EQ and some soothe on it as well, just to make this sound a little less harsh. That gives us a really good layer, but I didn't think that was enough, so we did do some layering here. Underneath the lead, we have something that sounds like this. Now I think on its own, that actually sounds really bad, but when you put it with the lead, it's just a nice little stereo layer. It's really quiet, you can almost not hear it, but all this was some sine waves that I have that are very stereo, and I'm distorting them a bit and adding some chorus. There's a really interesting element in this track called sine backing that I've added here, but before we talk about what that's doing, there's one other layer I'd like to show you, this being lead 2. This is another layer for my lead sound. This one's more square, you could hear that here. I just thought that went well and supported the other sounds very nicely. That gives us a very full lead, as you can see here. And now we could talk about the most fun layer, probably. This just being a simple sine pluck that's heavily compressed. This plays in the little gaps in the melody, being like a form of call and response, and gives you something different to listen to. So you see, that's something that just, like I said, fits in the gaps. I think that's a very necessary element. That's actually all over my music if you're familiar with some of the stuff I've put out. You'll hear that in a lot of my tracks, something I like to do quite a bit. And again, really, it's just a sine wave with another one an octave up just to give it some more harmonics. Really short decay, and that's just going into some delay, reverb, and a huge compressor at the end of it. Makes a very big sound, and I think that filled up the top of this very nicely. I do have a couple additional layers that fill it out a little more, like for example this one. This was just kind of a last minute decision. I realized, hey, this doesn't really have too much going on in the tops, could maybe use some more support. So I went ahead and added those together, and if we listen to that in context, suddenly we have a huge lead that's nice and powerful. I think that was enough, it didn't really need anything else. And this is a point I really want to stress out with this tutorial here. Make sure you're layering properly and with reason, don't just do it for no reason. Make sure, like say for example, your sound is lacking in a frequency area, you're adding something that helps it that way. Maybe it needs more stereo, be sure to do that. That's one of the main takeaways I want you to have with this video. And moving on from that, we're going to go into the bass and how this lead works with it. So let me just unsolo it here so you can hear it for the first time. Now this is going to sound a little bit clipped, that is intentional. It sounds a lot better in context of the full track, but when I'm soloing stuff, it's going to sound a little distorted. But here's what that sounds like. And, you know, if we take off our leads so you could hear what that's doing on its own. Again, very simple sound that I've put together here. We just have two layers here, one being a mid bass, that sounds like this. I've EQ'd it pretty harshly so there's no actual sub. This was just something that I thought was a nice wide layer to add to our main sound, which is this. So all that is, if we open up the patch, we've got a saw with its fundamental removed, and I literally just went through here and just chose different ones to see what sounded cool, and I decided on this one. And we have that working with a sine wave and some bright white noise that's going into a tube distortion. That's all there is to it. I like my basses very simple, and I thought this was a good example of that. And those are the two main, like, central elements of the track that are really important. I'm purposely going to mute a couple layers that we didn't talk about yet, so you could see the difference they make when we add them back in. So going over the two elements we talked about here being leads and of course the bass, our drop would currently sound like this. And you know, that's definitely something, but I feel like that needs more content. And I'm going to show you what I added to that to make it work. These being kind of like ear candy drop filler elements, very important to a track, and we're going to go over how I went about them in this one. So right now we just have our drums. I'm going to unmute a couple layers here, being this one drop fillers, and as well we have one called fun saw, and some MIDI guitar, and lastly some strings. So the background elements that are in this drop sound like this. Right, so let's break down what exactly is happening here. First off, the drop fillers layer. I have a couple of sounds in this pattern. Number one being drop saws, sounds like this. This is just a saw patch that's following the chords of the song. We also have an organ. And an electric piano. Put those together, you get this. Now the way I came across these sounds was just me going through different presets either I've made or I have in VSTs, and just trying to see what stuck and filled out the area of the frequencies that I needed filled. In this case being a lot of mids and highs because we had the leads taking up a lot of that, but as well the bass taking up the lows, but it needed stuff going on in the background to keep it exciting. This wasn't enough though. Once I added these, I realized it was still kind of lacking, so I added a few additional layers, one being this saw, sounds like this. So this is just a more rhythmic layer that I put in there. I felt it kind of needed that because the other ones were very static. It needed something to keep the pace up, so it just has a bit of rhythm going on. And then a MIDI guitar layer. This is just a whole bunch of different one-shots or plugins put together with some amp distortion on them as well. Doesn't really sound, you know, real at all. But this is super far in the background, and it didn't really matter, and I thought that filled up a nice space. And then we do have this washy string that just holds the same two notes the whole way through. So start adding these in one at a time. So those are all of the things that we have now that aren't actually the central elements, being like the lead or the bass or anything like that. And that's just quite a lot of layering, but it was completely necessary. Now we're going to get into the drums, which again, super important when it comes to, drum and bass. Let's go ahead and turn them on. First we have a kick. There's our kick. We have a top layer to it as well. I thought this made it sound really nice. I did a snare and a layer to that snare. There's also some ghost snares that happen throughout this. You can see them, they're very tiny over here. Let's go ahead and zoom in. Very necessary because otherwise it just becomes static pretty easily. Then I have a couple of hats and top loops added in. And then it goes into things like effects, like we have a crash here that's making it a little more interesting with this. Alright, so that's what was going on there. Overall, that just comes down to sample selection. As you grow your sample library, you'll get better kicks and snares, things like that. And if you have a good kick and snare, you pretty much have a good track, you just gotta get the tops to match it. And then it was just about mixing things together here. So I had to get from my intro, being this, just a little saw patch I made mixed with the piano, that had to have this build-up, which was me doing a snare roll with a kick that was getting faster in speed. I've layered it with a break, and then it was mainly me dragging in a whole bunch of effects, like risers, things like that, to get the hype going. That's what turned into this. And a really important piece of songwriting I'm doing here, I take my lead melody, and I throw an EQ on it, I cut off all the highs, and I just slowly increase the filter cutoff. You can see that's happening here. And what this is doing is it's revealing what your drop melody is before it happens. Very, very important, I think, because it helps your listener know what to expect in a way. Sometimes you want to catch them by surprise, but in this instance, a dance floor track like this, I wanted it to reveal itself. And that's a good way to kind of get the hype going, because you're going to hear a bigger version of that in a moment. I thought that was a really useful tip, so I went ahead and added that here. And that's how we came up with this idea. From there, it turns into things like making it sound really tight, mixing-wise, like doing sidechain. I do have an in-depth sidechain tutorial on my channel, which you should definitely check out. But quick rundown of how that works. These layers up here actually don't make sound. They're just placed on where my kick and snare are. And then I sidechain them. I use Pro MB, so I could sidechain the lows and the highs separately. And also, over here, towards the end, to kind of structure this a bit more, I already went over intro, build up over here, and drop. This is a B section. Usually after a drop, you'll have a bit where there's still really hyped drums, but your leads are gone and it just kind of chills out a bit before you'd go into, say, a breakdown and build up number 2 for a second drop. That sounds like this. I'll go into where it transitions. Alright, so that's what that sounds like. And again, you can see I still have my bass here. The main lead is gone, but I have a different new layer that's playing the lead melody still. I figured that in terms of you're telling a story with the track, that's reminding you of the melody in a way, but it's really far in the background. Pretty cool technique all around. It gets it a little more chilled out, but you still have big energy there. Very important. And again, once you have something like this set up, where you have, again, intro, build up, drop, B section, then you go into breakdown, and then you start building it up for drop 2. You can either keep that the same or add some variation. But once you have kind of these down, being the foundation, the building blocks of the track, you're in a position where you could start to try and finish it, which is really nice. Anyways, this has been a bit of a different tutorial by me. If you want to see me make something from scratch, where it's a lot more in-depth like that, I do have a video like that on my channel, which you can check out here. Anyways, though, that is going to wrap up this video. As I mentioned, if you enjoyed it, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe for more like this in the future. I hope that it's helped you out, and I'll catch you in the next video.